This year marks 175 years since the cornerstone for the Washington Monument was set into place. Faith Saley has the story of the long and challenging road to its completion.
In a town full of monuments, there's one that stands above them all.
The tallest, the simplest, the most straightforward, the most direct. It's very much like Washington himself in that way, actually.
Paul Goldberger is professor of design and architecture at the New School in New York and says the monument's iconic design was not, in fact, by design.
Because Robert Mills, who designed the Washington Monument, originally envisioned a classical colonnade going around the bottom. Basically kind of like a round classical temple. They had all kinds of financial problems as well as political problems, and so only the obelisk was built.
Construction began in 1848 and was painfully slow due to the challenge of 19th century crowdfunding, according to Mike Litterst, spokesperson for the National Mall.
No one person could give more than $1 to the Washington Monument because they wanted it to be a monument of the people. But when everybody can only give $1 and you need $250,000 plus to finish the project, that's going to be a problem over time.
Financial troubles aside, the monument had no shortage of groups who wanted to be associated with it.
Stones came from all corners of America.
And its stairwell's engraved stones give us a window into 19th century America.
And here we have the Fire Department of Philadelphia proudly showing off what was, in 1854, a state-of-the-art fire engine.
Masons, locomotive makers, temperance societies. A time capsule of states that were tenuously united.
This theme that the stones here give us a glimpse into mid-19th century America is illustrated no better than on the Tennessee stone. The Federal Union, it must be preserved. We're talking mid-1850s here. This is a direct reference to the storm clouds that are gathering that will eventually erupt in civil war in 1861.
Even foreign countries left their mark, and there was a legendary stone from the Vatican.
Pius IX sent a stone from the ruins of the Temple of Concord in the Forum in Rome. And this outraged a number of people in the country, specifically a political party called the Know-Nothings. Their platform was decidedly anti-Catholic and anti-foreigners.
The Know-Nothings threw the so-called Pope Stone into the Potomac, then staged a coup, taking over the society charged with building the monument in 1855. Construction ground to a halt. For more than 20 years, the obelisk was a stump. Cows were kept on the site during the Civil War, almost as if to symbolize the United States' unrealized ideals.
The centennial of American independence comes in 1876. That's the renewed interest. Not to just finish it, we're either going to finish it or we're going to tear it down because this is a complete embarrassment.
And it's one of the reasons that if you look closely at the monument today, you can see a difference in its marble cladding. When it was finally finished in 1885, it stood at 555 feet and 5 1/8 inches tall and was the world's tallest structure.
The Washington Monument is just a pure shape, and it suggests that Washington is an idea as much as a man, an idea of singularity, an idea of clarity, perfection, and heading for the sky.
Seeing the statues on Easter Island is something many travelers hope to do someday. Hearing an island song by one of its celebrated residents is what Kelafasane can offer us right now.
Concert pianist Mahani Teave has traveled the world, but Rapa Nui, sometimes known as Easter Island, is her home.
Rapa Nui, that's what we call ourselves here also. That's our people, the Rapa Nui people.
It's a triangle-shaped island about the size of Washington, D.C., but way out in the South Pacific. And it's best known for these statues, called moai. Scholars think they were built to honor the island's elders.
Our ancestors were all voyagers, and maybe that's what's in my blood too, this coming and going.
In the 1700s, Dutch explorers came to Rapa Nui. They landed on Easter, so they called it Easter Island.
Easter Island, that's the English name.
Miki Makihara, a linguistic anthropologist at Queens College in New York, has been studying Rapa Nui culture for 30 years. We're talking about a place that's only been inhabited by humans for maybe 1,000 years.
That is true, right? But a lot has happened.
In the late 19th century, slave raiders from Peru abducted about half the island's population and left behind smallpox, which killed many of the remaining islanders. Only 111 Rapa Nui survived. Nowadays, Rapa Nui is part of Chile, which is the closest mainland, 2,000 miles away.
It's a remarkable history of survival and reconstruction.
Those 111 people kept the language alive and transmitted it to the next generation.
Yeah.
It's a comeback story.
Yes. Yeah.
We descend from those 111.
Mahane Teave was born in Hawaii to an American mother. But her father is from Rapa Nui, and she spent most of her childhood there.
I feel so strongly about the island, and here are my roots. This is where I learned all my first everything.
She still remembers the day she heard that someone had brought something new onto the island, a piano.
We gotta go see that piano, let's go see. So we get to the lady's house and she opens the door. Please, can I go touch your piano? And I don't think she even got a chance to answer. And then after that, I was like, please, please, I want piano lessons.
There were no piano teachers on the island, so Teave asked the woman who owned the piano to give her lessons.
She got a piece of paper out, she drew some lines, and said, these are the notes, go home and learn them. I memorized what each little thing and each little line and space meant. And after a few days, she said, you know what, you can start coming to practice at my house.
In 1992, Teave's family moved to Chile, where she could study at a conservatory. She was 9. Was that a scary time for you?
It was just a very confusing time. And at the same time, there's this possibility to be able to continue with, wonderful music.
When she was 19, she left Chile to continue her studies, first in Cleveland, then Berlin. Soon, she was a celebrated concert pianist.
I would feel soaked with so many wonderful things, going to amazing concerts and interacting with incredible musicians.
Did you always know you wanted to come back to Rapa Nui at some point?
Well, I always felt the connection to the island. What about the children? They don't have any chance to study, and who's ever going to do anything about it?
Teave returned to Rapa Nui a decade ago, and in 2014, she built the island's first music school.
A totally self-sustainable structure built.
Last year, it was featured in the documentary Song of Rapa Nui.
We wanted to make an inspiring place, like a message of hope.
The school was constructed using an abundant, unnatural resource, trash.
We are in a garbage vortex. So, garbage from all over the world comes through the currents of the Pacific.
This school, built from garbage, is all about transformation. Are you hoping to find the next great concert pianist on Rapa Nui?
The children have the possibility to develop their talents, but I really think it's important that they cultivate the values, the virtues that are learned when you learn an instrument. You learn perseverance, you learn about teamwork, respect.
Before the pandemic, some people on Rapa Nui were concerned that tourism was damaging the island. Now, Mahane Teave says she's optimistic about the day when visitors can come back.
It's something that needs to find the harmony, because the way it was happening was not harmonious, either to the island, to the people, to the nature. Give them an actual experience of what it really is to be here.
And maybe a concert.
Maybe a concert, but we need a concert piano, so
This is a request from Rapa Nui, is less garbage, more grand pianos.
Exactly, more grand piano.
Her admirers say she's as much artist as architect. Martha Teichner is talking with Jeannie Gang.
A ribbon cutting.
Cut!
Music. And then instant awe when the American Museum of Natural History in New York City opened the doors last month to its new 230,000 square foot, nearly $500 million expansion.
We're absolutely stunned. It's so beautiful.
No more right angles.
The standard reaction? Stop, look up, and start taking pictures of this extraordinary space that seems eroded from rock by wind and water over millennia, not just built.
I don't know what it is exactly, but it seems very cool.
Architect Jeannie Gang designed it.
It's like being underneath a tree or a mushroom.
In January, as construction was finishing up, Gang took us on a hard hat tour.
Before the concrete was here, it was cages of rebar. And then the concrete is sprayed into those,
But where did these shapes even come from?
We studied literally flow, like melting ice and other interactions to get the patterns that you can find in nature. We can kind of play with it.
Here she is on the roof of her Chicago office.
And look at this. Look at the variety of, so it started to give us ideas that are more accidental and kind of natural and incredible.
Jeannie Gang's curvy 82-story Aqua Tower in Chicago was the tallest building in the world designed by a woman, until another of her buildings, the 101-story St. Regis Tower down the block, took the title, meaning Gang had broken into the boys' club of architectural titans whose skyscrapers defined the city's storied skyline. She is arguably the most important woman architect anywhere, but the designation makes her cringe.
I see it as it's a necessary conversation, but it also reduces the amount of time that women architects get to talk about how do you think about the city of the future? How do you think about materials? We can take the roof off.
Raised in Belvidere, Illinois, near the Wisconsin border, at 59, Jeannie Gang heads her own firm, Studio Gang, headquartered in Chicago. Innovating, pushing the boundaries of the good that architecture can do, is what Studio Gang is all about.
How can we learn to live lighter on the planet, have better relationships with those around us, create stronger communities? It's animal architecture.
Nature and the environment are central to every aspect of Jeannie Gang's work.
It's not just the romantic idea of nature, but the structures, the intelligence that is in the response to climate, the beauty that is there as well, and the pattern that always is for a reason.
Among Jeannie Gang's many accolades, a so-called MacArthur Genius Grant. In 2019, she was named to Time magazine's 100 Most Influential People list, and she's a professor at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. It's like a treehouse.
Yeah, it gives you that experience, being up in the canopy.
She's got bragging rights, so you'd think she'd want to show off her statement skyscrapers. No.
The aim of this was to be the most intimate theater around.
Instead, she took us to the tiny Writers' Theater in the Chicago suburb of Glencoe.
Glencoe didn't have a civic space, and we thought that this lobby could double as that.
But how to turn a desolate stretch of the Chicago River into a civic space? I was told that you could smell the river with industrial smell, chemicals, and waste.
Yeah.
The boathouse Gang designed for the Chicago Parks Department made it a destination.
I just feel kind of proud because I know that this boathouse was essential for a transformation along the whole river. It's pretty exciting.
So is the new $2.2 billion terminal at Chicago's O'Hare Airport she's working on. Its interior constructed from wood staves, and a complete makeover of the waterfront in Memphis.
Is this fun?
Yeah.
She's just finished a major rethink and expansion of the Arkansas Museum of Fine Arts in Little Rock.
This is a kind of stem through the building, or a blossoming out into the park.
Again, Jeannie Gang with an architectural flourish, demonstrating how a changed space can result in a changed experience, something new. Just as she did in Chicago's Lincoln Park.
We put together a team to redo the whole environment so that it could support nature.
Deeper pond, new boardwalk, different plantings, and this. Yes, it was inspired by a milkweed pod.
It has a magical effect. It's how it makes us feel around the natural environment and the city. It's all those things together.
When it was built in 2010, the pavilion was supposed to be temporary. Now it's an icon, and the expression of everything Jeannie Gang hopes architecture can achieve.
You could do a beautiful sculptural building. If it doesn't help people connect to each other or connect to their community, then it's not going to work. The beauty is in making it inspiring so people want to come back.
In the forests of Burgundy in central France stands a medieval castle. It's partially built, not because it's in ruins, but because it's still under construction. It looks and sounds like the year 1255. The challenge here is to build as they would have in that era. Long before electricity, using tools fashioned by blacksmiths, and laying stones by hand.
It's a mixture of sand and lime and water. So this is like our glue that we use to stick all of our stones together.
And this will last for...
And this will last thousands and thousands and thousands of years, no problem. This is what the Romans and the Greeks used.
Ben Wallace was restoring old buildings when he visited this castle called Guédelon as a tourist and applied for a job.
How is it to have been a stonemason as a career and then to discover this place exists?
Bit of a dream, really. The possibility to work as they did back in medieval times, to take the time as well to do things properly.
They are taking time. This project started 27 years ago and is still expanding into a medieval village.
Why build a castle?
I was staying a little modest. I don't speak about cathedral.
A cathedral would have been even more complicated.
A little more.
Co-founder Marlon Martin worked with the unemployed and liked the idea of creating jobs in rural France. Today, the project is sustained through ticket sales to 300,000 visitors a year.
I want that people stay here and let their imagination go.
The castle is here because of this quarry, where Tundra Schauren extracts sandstone for the walls.
I can select in this slate how many stones I want to cut out of it.
In a modern quarry, it's huge trucks and heavy equipment. What's used here is an iron wedge and sledgehammer.
It's a lovely job. And
lovely?
Yeah.
What makes it lovely?
Imagine that this simple block is going to represent a beautiful stone in the castle with beautiful geometrical shapes.
My job in Guédelon is really to grow medicinal gardens.
Resident herbalist Emma Blondie nurtures plants not just for food, but medicine, using medieval documents as a guide.
I just grinding like this until I have a very fine powder.
Paint recipes from the Middle Ages have been unearthed too.
It's a mix with the white of the egg, some cherry tree gum. Yes, I know.
Claire Pio's palette for wall designs comes from what's found on castle grounds.
So we have some different stones, clays, charcoal, ochres.
In this bold effort to build a castle from scratch, they're following a design that dates back to France's King Philip II, and 800 years later, it's fostering a new generation of specialist artisans. When Notre Dame burned in Paris, workers came from the castle to help and share expertise.
What's the bigger value to this project?
It's very green. We take the nature, trees, sand, stone, and we do a medieval castle, but we can imagine to take the same materials to do her house. It's a so modern adventure.
It's a modern adventure, building skills and realizing a dream by looking back to the design and ways of another time.
He designed some of the most beautiful homes in California at a time when race dictated where he could build a home of his own. On this weekend, we mark Juneteenth. Mark Whitaker remembers trailblazing architect Paul Revere Williams.
When John Sweeney spotted his dream home, all its realtor had to do was drop a name.
She said that this is a Paul Williams house. Do you know who Paul Williams is? Of course, I knew who Paul Williams was, but I feigned ignorance. I didn't want to show any sign that I knew him, that I was extremely excited and that I wanted this house very, very badly. But trust me, there were 1,000 little boys on Christmas morning jumping around inside of me.
Take a tour with John and his wife Cheryl.
The gold leaf ceiling.
The gold leaf, wow. And you'll see why a home designed by Paul Revere Williams is something to cherish.
The house itself is a piece of art.
Mm-hmm.
As you've looked around the house, you'll see that we are collectors of African American art, and our biggest showpiece is the house itself.
In Los Angeles, Williams homes, known for their grace and elegance, are a hot commodity, with one recently selling for $61 million.
This is the crescent wing. The iconic logo of the Beverly Hills is actually his handwriting.
Wow. Karen Hudson is Williams' granddaughter, and she's proud to show off perhaps his most glamorous achievement, the crescent wing of the famed Beverly Hills Hotel. Its distinctive entrance, the color scheme, and curves all remain as he designed them.
It is just as iconic and just as classic as it was then. At a time when he could not stay here, he could not eat here.
As described in Hudson's 2 books on his life, when Williams was born in 1894, a 6-decade career in architecture hardly seemed likely.
Orphaned before the age of 4, he was raised by a loving foster mother who believed he could do anything. Teachers were very clear you should not be an architect because white people won't hire you, black people can't afford you, and he persevered. He just believed that was what he was here to do, and that's what he was going to do.
In the 1920s, Williams' talent as a young architect met good luck. Through a series of improbable connections, he was hired to design one showcase home after another. His career was launched within the realities of the time.
It was not appropriate for him to sit next to his white clients, particularly not a white woman, and so he learned to draw upside down.
Upside down.
Upside down. So if I said, Mark, do you want a big kitchen? He would just upside down start drawing it and sketching it in front of you.
That's also a wow.
That's a wow.
That he could do that.
That's a wow.
It was a performance that caught the eye of Hollywood. Soon he was designing homes for stars like Lon Chaney, Barbara Stanwyck, and Lucy and Desi.
All it takes is one party. You go to a party and say, who was your architect?
They could see his creativity.
They could see his creativity, they could appreciate it, and they could show off.
Frank Sinatra showed off his Paul R. Williams home on CBS to Edward R. Murrow.
Tell me, Frank, what room are we in now?
Well, this is the combination dressing room, Ed, and bedroom with my unique-looking fireplace with the Chinese red. I'm sorry you can't see the colors.
As for Williams' own home, for the first 3 decades of his career, he lived here with his wife and 2 daughters in a house currently being restored.
He was living on the same block as people who worked on the bus or people who worked in people's homes.
At the time, this LA neighborhood was effectively segregated, and he wrote about it in a 1937 magazine essay called I Am a Negro.
What he said was, today I designed a home in one of the most beautiful vistas in the country, a home that I could afford, but I come home to my relatively inexpensive, modest home because I'm a Negro.
I call him the Michael Jordan of African American architects.
Roland Wiley is an LA architect and something of a Williams superfan.
He had this rare combination of talent, personality, vision,
and a commitment, Wiley says, to more than just his white clients.
He was quietly doing all of his community work. He was quietly helping to build banks. He was very much interested in uplifting our race of African Americans.
Didn't he also design affordable housing?
He designed small houses, affordable houses.
In all, Williams, who died in 1980, designed some 3,000 buildings, and he was the first black member of the American Institute of Architects. Today, African American membership hovers at just 2%.
His God-given talent allowed him to transcend that, and that's what I think.
But with all the talent in the world, you still have to get up the next day and go back out there, try to make it in a world where people don't expect someone like you to make it.
But that's what's fascinating about it, that he did that.
After John and Cheryl Sweeney bought their 1927 home, John, a veteran civil rights attorney, found the original covenant.
None of the real estate herein described shall be sold, conveyed, leased, or rented to or occupied by any person other than that of the Caucasian race.
This house was designed not for an African American, not for an Asian American or Latino American or Caucasian American. It was designed for a person who appreciates fine things, and that's the story this house tells. This is the sun porch.
To ensure that Williams' legacy endures, the Sweeneys worked to have their home declared a LA Historic Cultural Monument.
This house is now legally protected.
It is now legally protected. This is Mr. Williams' vision, and it won't be disturbed.
A fitting tribute for the master architect with a groundbreaking life.
East meets West at Utah's Promontory Summit, the spot where we just celebrated the 150th anniversary of the Transcontinental Railroad. As John Blackstone explains, East met West there in more ways than one.
It's something railroad enthusiasts believe they might never see again. One of the biggest steam locomotives ever built, back on the tracks, rumbling west under its own steam. As Union Pacific number 4014 pulled out of Cheyenne, Wyoming, crowds lined the tracks, waving at engineer Ed Dickens, urging one more pull of the whistle.
I don't know what it is about that whistle. We hear whistles, we hear horns in our life, but the steam locomotive whistle is really something that just moves you.
Dickens led the small team of Union Pacific workers who spent 5 years toiling to bring the massive machine back to life. Just give me some idea of the scale of this. I mean, these wheels are almost as big as we are.
This is 17,000 pounds all by itself, without everything else hanging off of it.
4014 is one of just 25 locomotives built in the 1940s, aptly named Big Boys. 132 feet long, weighing more than 1 million pounds, producing 7,000 horsepower. But when the age of steam came to an end in the late 1950s, 4014 became obsolete. Until Dickens and his team brought it back to life. Their goal was to get 4014 rolling again in time to celebrate one of the greatest rail accomplishments ever, the Transcontinental Railroad, built at the urging of President Lincoln.
It's very humbling that all of the sacrifice, the tremendous human effort to build something as complex as a set of railroad tracks across territory that many people have never even been across before.
Crews worked from both the east and the west, finally meeting on May 10th, 1869 at Promontory Summit, Utah.
And we call it the moonshot of the 19th century. It was impossible. It was an impossible dream.
At Golden Spike National Historical Park, rail fans dressed in style to mark the anniversary.
Hello.
If not always with historical accuracy.
President Lincoln, this was all your idea, was it not?
I wasn't the only one that had the idea, but I was thankful to have a big part in it.
Replicas of Victorian steam engines rolled in for a reenactment of the legendary photo celebrating the driving of the Golden Spike. But the faces in that photo from 150 years ago look much different from those gathered here this time.
It took 150 years to gain that recognition, so our history is now coming alive.
They are descendants of the Chinese laborers who made up about 90% of the workforce on the western portion of the railroad.
The workers on the line who cleared the way for the railroad, who laid the roadbed and laid the track and laid the ties and so forth, and then especially did the tunnels, was almost exclusively Chinese.
Gordon H. Chang, a history professor at Stanford University, is the author of a newly released book on the Chinese who built the Transcontinental Railroad. The gold rush had brought thousands from China to California in the 1850s. When construction of the railroad began in 1863, the Chinese were not the first choice to work in it.
There was belief that they were either temperamentally or physically unfit for railroad work, but workers they hired on did very, very well for them. They were very, very pleased. Ultimately, they hired up to 20,000 workers.
Not only was the Chinese labor force plentiful, the workers were paid less than whites doing the same job. And the work was hard. They took on the most challenging portion of the Transcontinental Railroad, California's Granite Mountain Range, the Sierra Nevada.
15 tunnels had to be blasted, carved out through the Sierra Nevada. The Chinese carved out those 15 tunnels, the longest one being over 1,600 feet in length, and it took more than 2 years using only hand tools and black powder.
In the newspapers of the day, Chang found recognition for the contribution the Chinese rail workers were making to a growing nation.
To read the history,
Jeff Lee, a retired dentist from San Jose, California, is inspired by the hard work his great-grandfather did.
They don't come over as Hulk, right? They come over as pretty much me, right? And they learn to adapt to what they had to do physically, mentally, emotionally, as individuals and as groups.
And Lee is proud of where these tracks have taken his family.
Doctors, dentists, architects, UC Berkeley, Yale, Princeton.
But soon after the railroad was finished, the nation's mood began to turn against the hard-working immigrants.
With the rise of the anti-Chinese movement, the earlier history of what they did in California is erased. The Chinese are driven out in town after town and their homes destroyed. The Chinese became undesirable, and therefore you don't want to include them in the history of the country.
That erasure is what the descendants gathered at Promontory Summit wanted to set right.
So this is Lim Lip Hong, my great-great-grandfather. He came here when he was 12.
So he was on his way back to China, but he stopped in San Francisco and said, no, this is my home. I love America.
Much has changed in 150 years for families and for the railroad. The old steam locomotives that originally traveled these rails were replaced by massive machines like 4014. But even this giant had to finally give way to modern diesels. Still, there is value in preserving the memory of all that came before. The locomotives, the tracks, and those who built them.
The must-see art collection in the D.C. region right now is actually 20 miles from the mall. Glenstone, where ultra-modern galleries and giant sculptures by the likes of Jeff Koons and Richard Serra play peekaboo with their surroundings.
The landscape is meant to loosen you up and let your mind start to wander and see things.
How many acres is the whole property at this point?
So we're now up to about 230 acres.
Mitch and Emily Rales built Glenstone to share their extraordinary collection of modern and contemporary art. But they wanted to make this a different kind of museum, a blend of art, architecture, and nature.
It's not just about the objects that you see, it's truly an experience.
Their collection includes some 1,300 works, starting with mid-century greats like Louise Bourgeois, Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, Andy Warhol, and moving on to later works by artists like Jean-Michel Basquiat. It all began in 1998, when tech billionaire Mitch Rales, who is now 62, had a near-death experience.
I was in a pretty traumatic accident in Russia. Everything that I had possession-wise blew up in the helicopter, and I came back a different person. Basically decided that I was going to change the course of my life.
7 years later in New York, Rales, who was divorced, met Emily Way, a young and influential curator 20 years his junior. She agreed to help him launch Glenstone.
So at what point did you decide that you were both not just in love with art, but in love with each other?
Oh, it was kind of love at first sight.
We hit it off pretty quickly.
They were married in 2008, and Emily Rales helped interest her husband in a new generation of artists.
Then you walk in to this.
This chamber was specifically designed to hold a mammoth and mysterious work by Robert Gober.
There's this sort of eerie and slightly sinister feeling to being in a forest, but also in jail, surrounded by water that is probably not fit for drinking because there's rat bait everywhere.
This room is composed entirely of works by LA-based artist Charles Ray.
So he pulled this out of a junkyard.
Including this, a stainless steel replica of a wrecked truck.
I think a lot of people are going to look at something like this and say, come on, is this art?
That's what they said about the abstract expressionists. Art history takes 30, 40, 50 years to really broadcast itself. So we'll see.
Mitch and Emily Rales are making art history here. The museum was first opened on a very limited basis in 2006, but they have spent more than $200 million to enhance the experience. Admission is free but limited to 400 visitors a day.
We seek to give lots of space to our visitors to really give them the time to explore and enjoy.
The Raleses live quietly right on this property. Though they are noted philanthropists in the art world, they have, until now, worked hard to stay out of the spotlight.
I don't think we've been as private as people want to make us out to be.
How many TV interviews have you done?
This is the first, thank you very much.
Just saying.
But we've been on a journey, and it took us 15 years to get to this point today.
And the Raleses have endowed Glenstone for what they hope is forever, seeking to create a lasting legacy.
What we're hearing day after day from these visitors is that a quiet place for contemplation of art in nature is exactly what they need. Their souls are hungry for it, and we hope that that's what we will continue to deliver to our visitors.
If Broadway hits the heights and Hollywood tops the box office, then you might say Chicago towers above them all for its architecture.
If you go up about 15 stories, there's an outcropping, kind of a shoulder. It's a little larger.
It's considered the birthplace of the modern skyscraper, and the city has made architecture one of its main tourist attractions.
When it was completed in 1898, it was called the North American Cold Storage Building.
On any given day, dozens of architecture tours wind through the city's waterways and streets.
This is 1983, and what I like about the building is every pane of glass, the edge of it is pinched in so it bubbles out a little bit.
The buildings are considered works of art, and their designers treated like directors are in Hollywood.
This is going to look like a thin champagne-stemmed glass.
Do architects get more respect in Chicago than they do in other places?
I think so. We don't have movie stars or the film industry.
Got Michael Jordan.
Yeah, he's pretty famous too. So athletes and architects.
Architectural giants like Frank Lloyd Wright, Mies van der Rohe, Helmut Jahn, all contributors to the Chicago cityscape. Jeannie Gang has also made her mark. See that building? The one that looks like waves? That's her design, aptly named Aqua.
When I'm like in a taxi or, just coming along and someone points out our building, my building, I'm always taken aback because I think it's ingraining into the collective memory of the city at this point, and it's pretty exciting for me.
But this incredible skyline was born out of tragedy, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. The fire decimated the city's wooden structures, leaving an estimated 300 people dead and more than 3 square miles in ruins. Reconstruction soon followed, a process that would redefine both the city and the country.
If you think about the history of New York, it was a Dutch settlement, and Chicago really is the beginning of American city planning.
And this year marks another defining note in the city's rich architectural history, the inaugural Chicago Architectural Biennial.
They've twisted them.
It's a combination of exhibit and think tank devoted entirely to architectural ideas. Sarah Herda is one of its directors.
We have over 130 participants from 30 countries on 6 continents. So we really wanted to create a global platform to talk about what's most urgent in architecture today.
One topic on the table, affordable housing.
And this was built for how much money?
$3,500 US.
This is bamboo?
This is a kind of thatched bamboo. It does have a steel frame. And the idea is that this house could be constructed within a day and that you would never need more than 2 people to hold any one piece of the building.
Which is incredible.
Yes.
Other exhibits challenge conventional design, like this reinvented office space.
What do we do in here?
Well, we climb in here. And no matter where you are in this construction, you're never sitting.
Why is this something that's considered architecture?
Well, it's absolutely about redefining space. So it's creating a new environment for work to replace the office cubicles you are probably more familiar with.
And perhaps the most talked about exhibit is a reimagined police station by Jeannie Gang. The design is intended to help build trust between police and citizens, a topic currently on the minds of many in Chicago.
We kind of divided the police station into 2 parts, a secure area and a more public zone. Mental health services, for example, a nutritionist, a computer lab, and those are things that we felt could reanimate the police station and make it more of a place that people want to come to.
The Architecture Biennial ends this week, but it will return in the fall of 2017 to maintain Chicago's tradition of inventive architectural design.
There's a kind of dignity that good architecture can bring to everyday life. And I think that the architects in this exhibition are really concerned with just that.
For years now, our colleague Jonathan Vigliotti has traveled the country reporting on the effects of climate change on small-town America. He shares some insights from his new book, Before It's Gone.
Scientists have been warning about climate change since the mid-1800s, when the Western world was revolutionized by the invention of coal-burning, CO2-spewing industrial machines. Those warnings, largely disregarded, have become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And today, a growing number of people bear the burden. I've seen this trauma firsthand while reporting from American main streets that have surrendered to extreme weather. People, landmarks, traditions gone forever. According to data from the U.S. Census Bureau, an estimated 2.5 million Americans were forced from their homes last year because of extreme weather. It doesn't have to be this way.
A new generation of scientists has prescribed medication to heal our planet.
Reducing greenhouse gases has always been drug number one, and it is critical. But even if we cut all of our global emissions today, it could take decades to lower Earth's fever, similar to how aspirin doesn't stop a headache immediately. Fortunately, there is a faster-acting treatment, returning our habitats, our towns, back to a more natural state. Healthy habitats are more resistant to the impacts of extreme weather. The town of Lahaina on the Hawaiian island of Maui was prescribed this, but didn't take the medicine. Last year, they experienced disastrous consequences. 80% of the town was destroyed, and more than 100 people were killed in what became the deadliest wildfire in modern American history. Local leaders described the disaster as a bomb going off, implying there was no warning. But nearly 10 years earlier, scientists noted Hawaii's warming climate had increased the fire threat. They recommended restoring wetlands, conserving water, removing dry invasive grasses, and using fire-resistant materials when building. A federal program would even help fund the costs, but local leaders didn't act in time. In the miles-long path of destruction, only one home remained unscathed.
The owners of the house with the red roof, as it's known today, had made updates to modernize their home, but those changes also may have helped protect it from the fire. People everywhere are listening and taking action.
And we all have the power to do the same.